When I was a young man, I had a friend who had spent the first few years of his adult life living in Saudi Arabia with his parents, and he told me about the Mutawa, which is the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, which is the Saudi Arabian religious police. And I remember at the time thinking that this was mind-blowing. Like, you actually have guys going around basically enforcing Islamic morality. And I had no idea what Islamic morality was at the time or any of the things that it meant. But at the time, it just seemed like an incredibly overbearing, tyrannical imposition on the society. The people should be the ones who determine right and wrong, and the state and its arms and its organs, its job was to just enforce the law and keep public order. And this kind of ethical state, in which the state takes an active interest in the ethical lives of its citizens beyond what the law has actually stipulated, was a kind of crazy idea to me. Because, of course, I'd grown up in the English-speaking liberal West, in which the society itself is assumed to be good, and the state assumed itself to have limitations. Of course, Saudi Arabia isn't like that. It's an absolute monarchy. It's totalitarian in many ways, and it has an overarching and incredibly heavy moral code. Now, this has been wound back somewhat in recent years. The Saudis, in some ways, you could say, are going soft, actually. Not that I'm in favour of this, because we actually live in Britain on the wrong side of this. Instead of a committee for the promotion of virtue and the prevention of vice, we have the opposite. We have a committee for the promotion of vice and the prevention of virtue, and we see them every day operating in Britain. For example, you may have seen this going around, which is a partially deaf man who was accosted by this police officer because he thought that the man had said to someone foreign that he had asked them to speak English, and apparently speaking English may well be a hate crime. Let's watch this.
Apparently during some conversations between yourself, apparently you have alleged, we weren't here, so I don't know you said it, but you've alleged to say, speak English, or words to that effect?
Speak clearly.
Speak clearly.
No,
Okay.
the gentleman's partially deaf.
Yeah, he said speak clearly.
Yeah.
So I couldn't even hear.
No, and that's fine, and that's why we've just come to speak, because potentially someone could perceive that as a hate crime.
Did we just know this was going to happen?
No, I
didn't
know.
People, if someone says to me, officer, I believe this, then we need to look at it, because someone's potentially reporting to me.
So the issue here, and there's a part of me that feels bad for our police of virtue and vice, because they are generally not our best and brightest. They're generally quite normal people and quite regular people who do not have an extensive background in literature or philosophy or the arts or anything like that. They are relatively normal, and what they're being asked to do is be not only police officers, not only constables, but also philosophers, because now they have to work out whether something philosophically meets the threshold of being offensive and a hate crime, because there are many good reasons why I might tell someone who is foreign to speak English, right? There are many very good legitimate reasons. For example, this person might have come up to me and asked me a question, and they may have said it in whichever garbled language that they speak that I don't understand. And so I would have said, well, speak English, otherwise I can't help you. And so that can't possibly be a hate crime. That is the most sort of practical, utilitarian reason, I would say, speak English. You could get the other end of the spectrum, and this is where the police officer was worried about. Saying, well, what if you're saying you should speak English in England? It's like, well, okay, that could be considered offensive, maybe. And even if it is, does that rise to the level of a hate crime? Is it hateful to suggest that the people who move to England ought to learn the language and fit in with the locals? Are we going to revisit the conversation about integration, which I notice is somewhere deep in the rearview mirror at this point? Because, again, now he's got to be like, right, okay, well, I'm going to juggle a series of competing claims as to the legitimacy of who gets to speak what in England. And actually, it kind of makes sense that we require that people who move to England to speak English, right? It kind of makes sense. If we expect us to all get along and be able to get along, to be able to even understand one another, makes perfect sense. However, if your job, whether you realise it or not, is to protect the feelings of the minority against the judgments of the majority, then you could end up in a position where you're like, well, hang on a second. If they ask them to speak English, they might feel in a certain way that has been prescribed by very, very ill-defined legislation as a hate crime, which for some reason is worse than a regular crime. Notice how this works. Well, we were going to give you 4 years for battery or whatever, but now we're going to give you 8 years because you did it for the wrong reasons. It's like, yeah, but if you battered someone, I don't really care what the reasons were. I care what the intention was. Did he mean to hurt that man? The actual reasons that he chose to hurt someone are kind of immaterial to what has actually happened here. Did Joe Bloggs beat up Mark Smith because he caught him in bed with his wife? Or did he do it because Mark Smith has black skin? Well, it doesn't really matter to the outcome, does it? The outcome is Mark Smith took a battering, so it doesn't really matter if it's been done for reasons you particularly disapprove of, because I disapprove of him beating him up because he caught him in bed with his wife or something, right? Actually, I'm not that bothered, but you know what I mean? Like, the point being, the act was intentional. The reason for taking the action, the reason for coming to the position of having intent to harm is kind of pointless. It doesn't matter. And I don't really think it's ever been a part of English law up until about the late 90s when Tony Blair decided, you know what? Racism's the worst thing that a person can do. It's like, no, there are definitely worse things than racism out there, actually. And this has led to people who are not philosophers, who do not engage in deep moral interpretations and interrogations into the nature of right and wrong, to be forced to do so on the street. And you can see how much everyone is groaning about this, because they know he is not equipped for this job. So, oh God, here we go. How is it hate crime for me to say he should speak English in England? It's not a hate crime. It's completely straightforward. Everyone agrees, actually, that they should actually speak English in England. And if I moved to another country, I'd be expected to learn their language, and rightfully so. And if I didn't learn that language, that would be on me. I would be the problem there. And people there could rightfully claim, no, you should learn our language to be able to fit in with our society, which is why you moved here in the first place. Completely fair argument. There or here. Completely fair. But our police of vice and virtue are totally off the reservation. They're totally out of their depth. They don't know that they're meant to be having these kind of internal monologues with themselves, because we have not hired philosophers to do philosophy in service of a very vaguely defined law. Because remember, the British hate crime laws are not just if you say this or say that or say the other. There is no enunciated series of things you are not allowed to say. What it is if someone perceives your interaction with someone else to be racist or discriminatory or whatever it is, the exact terminology they use, they themselves can say that was a hate crime, even if the person it happened to didn't perceive it, and the person that was happening by had no idea that it would be interpreted this way. A third party can step in, and so a police officer, a moral busybody, can step in and say, well, I've decided that's a racist interaction. How dare you, sir? And so suddenly the guy who can't speak said, no, I need you to speak clearly. It's like, what? You said speak English? You're going to jail, Sonny Jim. And it's like, okay, this is not only, right, for the well-meaning ones, a bad thing, right? This is crazy. For the well-meaning police officer, it's just like, look, dude, I need to know yes or no if that's a law broken, right? I need the laws to be able to properly enforce them, to be like, right, if someone does this, they have broken the law. As in, if someone smashes some property, attacks someone, they have broken a law. Black and white, right? It needs to be completely crystal clear, because again, the average Bobby on the beat or high-vis jacket foot soldier of the regime, they are generally not scholars, and we don't want them to be. Nobody asked them to be. They weren't expected to be until now, where they have to now have a deep grasp on moral philosophy. Or you open the door to people who are bad intentioned. You open the door to people who just want to be able to have a platform by which essentially to torture members of the public, to say, yep, no, you can't do right from wrong here, because there is no hard and fast rule. There is no properly delineated line. And anything you have said or done, I am allowed to interpret as you doing something wrong. This is a recipe for tyranny. This is a recipe for disaster. This is a recipe for the public not respecting the police anymore. And it's not like we don't have enough examples of like just little bully cops just going around being little absolute bad people who are using this authority just to be a pain, just to be able to lord it over. I mean, why is she pushing this guy? Arrest him or leave him alone, right? But she's just using her authority. I've got the badge, I've got the high-vis jacket, I've got the institutional power behind me, and therefore I can make you dance the tune that I want. You essentially have no rights because you have no idea of your own legal standing. You have no idea of the laws that are being wielded against you. And even if you do, the only thing you can know is that there is nothing firm to grasp onto. I can say, well, my subjective interpretation of this was that you had said something racist, and therefore I am enough to condemn you as being a racist, or this, or that, or whatever it is. Right? This is a wholly unacceptable position. We need to get rid of any kind of social morality policing law that doesn't involve actual physical harm. Right? The old laws that we used to have, well, if someone says something offensive, well, you're just going to have to deal with it because they were within their rights to say it. Well, we've lost that. And look where we are now with a bunch of police officers who are just not our best and brightest, not that smart, being tasked with something they are not bright enough to do. And it's just opening the door to people who don't deserve their jobs, who ought not to be the people above us because they clearly don't feel accountable to us. And what you have done here is completely destroy the concept of policing by consent. This is hardly a good idea. And it's a combination of the kind of people in these institutions and the laws themselves that have allowed this to happen. There needs to be a clean sweep. Some sort of, as David Starkey puts it, great repeal bill would be a great start to fixing these problems and making sure this nonsense doesn't have to happen. It's not wrong for English people in England to say, look, guys, could you speak English, please? If you've come from wherever land and you've come here, you are obligated to speak English in the same way I'm obligated to speak whatever it is you speak.